One of the principles of learning has to do with prior memory. Students' prior knowledge can help or hinder learning, so our goal is to activate that prior memory. In particular, students build upon prior knowledge to learn new facts and skills, and you need to activate it. So, for example, they don't just learn knowledge in a vacuum. They have to relate it to prior things that they are familiar with. I think most faculty members and instructors understand that, and they do a good job of trying to relate things backwards. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about how memory actually works. I'm going to do it with a real simple example of facts. Suppose students are needed to learn states and capitals. All right, California, Sacramento, Iowa, Des Moines. Now, if I want to play on this memory and demonstrate activating prior memory, then the way I would do it in presenting this to students is to give the state first, Minnesota, and then show the capital. So that little bit of time, they just look at Minnesota and everything comes to mind, what they think about Minnesota. And so when I put down St. Paul, it's like, oh yeah, that's the twin city of Minneapolis. So it's just a matter of activating everything we know about something before we show the solution. Let's show an example in ECE of how to apply that. You're going to cover a circuit response. Here's the differential equation for it. And the way most people present this is they say, recall from math that the solution to this differential equation is such and such. And then they're going to build off of it with something other than a zero there. And what's the problem with that? It's very passive. They're not actually activating their memory. They're just passively writing down what you wrote. So an alternate way of doing it is to ask the question, what is the solution to this? Give them time to think about it and write it down in particular. So that does activate prior memory. You're not telling them, you're making them think about it themselves. And one other thing I wanted to point out here, it was kind of subtle. I changed what you're ultimately interested in is dv/dt, and what I wrote here is this. And you relate this back to math. From math, what's the solution to this? Now in math, they remember dx/dt because that's the way they learned it. dv/dt is a little bit different. So that's one thing that we oftentimes have problems in class when we say, oh, remember in math you did such and such? You're using a terminology and you're presenting it in a way different from what they learned in math. So it's going to take them a lot longer to try to recall that from memory. If you understand or remember or know how they saw it in math, then you can ask them, you can get quicker recall if you say dx/dt, and then in class, they'll remember that, and then class, you make the relationship. You say, well, in math, you may have done dx/dt, but in this course, v is more important, so we're going to do dv/dt. So you help make that bridge for them. And then another thing to do is to think about the steps. You ask them to think about the steps to solve that. And have them think about that or talk through what are the ways to solve that. And that activates prior memory. That is a procedural memory, not a factual memory. What are the steps to do this? And this is a deeper memory and will actually help you more in the class. Now, the problem with prior learning is that it might also hurt you if it's based on misconceptions. So the idea here is to identify and diffuse misconceptions. Let me show you an example here. Okay, I teach signals and systems, and I write up a block diagram like this. And a lot of them are going to want to take the signal and split it off. And that's because their prior knowledge was with circuits right here. And in circuits, they think of the current divider law. So you have to recognize that and say, this is not like circuits. In circuits, you separate this off. The signal is the same here. So it's to recognize and diffuse that. If I want to go a little bit deeper misconception. They seem to have problems with this and they can't get over it. And you want to maybe dispel that misconception by building a bridge to knowledge that they do know. So for example, in this particular case, I give them this circuit. And I say, solve this circuit. And a large percentage of the students, maybe about 20%, are going to want to do a KVL around here. And in doing the KVL, they're going to make the assumption that the voltage across this source is 0. Now that's wrong, and I can tell them it's wrong, and a lot of them will still do it. And so then what I found is I need to build a bridge to other knowledge. So I say, okay, suppose that the voltage was 0. Well, what would that mean about the power? Okay, the power for this source VI, the power would be equal to 0. Does it make sense to have a source with power equal to 0? And they realized, no, that doesn't make sense, and so this doesn't make sense. And so that, making this bridge to power, seemed to be much more effective than just telling them that the voltage is not 0. And also, another way of doing it, which didn't seem to work as well, is to say, well, I never assumed that the current through a voltage source is 0, so why would I assume that the voltage across a current source is 0? I mean, that's another way of doing it, but this one seemed to be a little bit more effective. But the basic thing is to build a bridge to knowledge that they do know. Thank you.